Look how pretty this stack is. I swear I did not read this way on purpose. This happened and I was so pleased with it. The reds and the blacks just really blend together. Hi, I'm Dom. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to do my October wrap up and talk about all the different books that I read this month. So this was a great reading month. I had so many favorite reads that I honestly could have rated a lot more of them 5 stars. I was just hesitant because this was my first time reading horror, and I did not know if I enjoyed these books as much as I did because they were my first time reading them or because they were actually that good. So I did rate them down a little bit, but I think I'm going to change my rating as I discuss them because they are still sticking in my head. So this month I read 7 books and I listened to 1 audiobook for a total of 8, and that's pretty good because I had a little bit of a reading slump halfway through the month and did not read any books for a few days or like a week. So catching up was top priority. I also started 2 other audiobooks, but I did not finish them this month because I got sidetracked by things like Halloween. But let's talk about the books I read. So the first book I read this month was You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight by Kaylnn Bayron. It follows Charity where she works at her summer job at a camp that pretends to be a horror camp to scare people who sign up for it. And there's an actual thing like this that exists where you have to sign away your rights to live. And you go through like this horrifying experience where they actually like drown you and stuff, and it's absolutely wild. I think there's an episode on one of those Netflix shows where it's like scariest places in the world that talks about this camp, but this is kind of similar in the setting. So Charity works there with a few of her friends that have worked there every summer for a guy who's not really around, which was like a wild concept for me because they're teenagers, but apparently it was needed and necessary for the book. But on the last weekend of the camp, the workers start disappearing. At first it's a few workers and she chalks it up to them leaving the season early, but then things really start to go down and one by one they get picked off. This book is great if you love like 90s, early 2000s slasher films like Scream, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and of course camp setting Friday the 13th. Honestly, reading this book was such a journey for me. This was the first horror book that I've ever read, and I was on the edge of my seat the entire time. I don't know if it's just me and I'm easily scared, but my heart was pumping so much. And it's a quick read. It's only like 230 pages, so you can knock through this in a day. And I honestly did in 2 days because I had to stop at some point to like catch my breath and calm down. But it was a great book to kind of ease me into reading this type of genre. So I rated this 4 stars, but now that I'm thinking about it, I would say it's a 5-star read for me. I'm currently reading Clown in the Cornfield, which is like another slasher teen type of book, and I'm not enjoying it as much, so I feel like this book actually was as good as I thought it was, and I wasn't just chalking it up to the fact that this was my first time kind of reading this genre. So after reading about a bunch of people being killed off, I thought what better than to read about the ones who survived. The Final Girl Support Group is about literally that, a group of final girls coming together to talk to each other about the traumatizing and harrowing experience of surviving different life or death situations. But when somebody decides to rip all of their lives apart again, Lynette has to figure out exactly what's going on. This book is an ode to horror films. It gives what happens when the credits stop rolling. You get to see different types of famous films through the eyes of the people who would be final girls in them. So movies like Friday the 13th, Black Christmas, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, we kind of get to see the lives of the different girls who experience this trauma. This book also did a great job of exploring the fascination that we as a society have with things like murder and how some people idolize serial killers and mass murderers in a way that is really toxic and demoralizing for the people who survive those types of scenarios. So it's a good think piece about how far should we really delve into true crime. I absolutely adored this book. I gave it 4 stars. This is my first Grady Hendrix, obviously, because I've never read horror before, and it made me want to read his other works because he had me on the edge of my seat the entire time. With that said, I thought it got a little murky in the middle. I felt like too much was going on and not enough was explained, and everything sort of felt random. And I don't know if the ending tied that up well enough for me. I am the worst at trying to figure out what's going to happen next, so it was not me trying to figure anything out, but I wanted it to feel like it was a continuous, necessary evolution, and I didn't always feel that way in this book. But this is a bestseller, so I'm sure you have probably read it, and plenty of people have probably read it, but if you haven't read it, then you should definitely get to it. So after all of that horror, I needed a break. I was like, I'm scared, I'm having nightmares, I'm becoming paranoid. I literally was taking a shower and I got out because I was so sure that somebody was about to murder me. I had soap in my eyes. I don't even know what I thought I was gonna do, but I was in sheer panic because I kept thinking, like, this is the scene. This is my moment of death. And I was like, I need to take a break. I can't keep going like this. I need to read something else that's kind of going to take my mind off of things. So that's why I picked up A Dreadful Splendor. This is like a gothic mystery ghost story wannabe that is also low-key kind of a romance, which I was living for. So I loved this book. This was a 4-star read for me. I thought it was really interesting, the setting of the book, where it took place, and the characters that existed. I was not expecting to fall so thoroughly into the mystery of this or to be trying to figure it out myself. Like I said, I'm really bad at figuring out what actually happened in a book. So I just loved going on the journey that she went on as we explored both the past and the present of this home and the people who dwell in it. I flew through this book and I really fell in love with the characters, and I really appreciated a lot of things that the author did in this story, because there was a lot of times where she could have taken one turn that was sort of predictable and common, and instead she took a different angle that kept the story progressing in a way that you could kind of agree with. I held my breath a few times thinking that I was going to dislike the book or was going to do something that kind of turned me off, and that never happened. This is also my first time reading a gothic novel, so I wasn't sure if I would like it, but I'm definitely down with those vibes, and I'm looking for more eerie, dark mansions with weird aloof staff and tons and tons of secrets. So I think this is a debut author, or she self-published a book before this, but I'll definitely be looking out for her work because I want to check it out again and see if she's able to continuously write stories that pull me in like this when they're not necessarily something that I would usually pick up. I signed up for Book of the Month. They had a promo going on for like $15 for your first book. I was like, you got me. It's been months and months of me seeing ads for this, and I will finally sign up for it and read a book from you, which I'm very happy I did, because I ended up getting You Again, which is a debut novel that came out I think in September or October and was on like their backlog list of books that you could choose from. I got it pretty quickly and it was already on my TBR list, so as soon as I got it I kind of started reading it. If you don't know, this is a When Harry Met Sally kind of retelling, which you might not because it's a movie from like the 80s or 90s. It's like one of those things that like my generation, the millennials, are very aware of, but I don't think Gen Z even really talks about it. They might be talking about it now because of this book, but I don't think I've heard anybody outside of like my mom and my generation like actually care about this movie. But it's one of my favorite rom-coms. But this is a story about two people who meet, and upon their first meeting they kind of hate each other, and it occurs time and time again as the years go on until eventually they move into a friendship and possibly into something more. So this book follows Ari, a commitment phobe, and Josh, who is a hopeless romantic, as they navigate relationship, careers, and lives through like their early 20s into their 30s. And so it starts with them meeting each other when they both were dating the same woman, and of course that caused them to instantly take a disliking to each other. What I loved about this book is that the characters were sometimes unlikable. I feel like in a lot of romances they want you to root for the couple so bad that they don't necessarily give them flaws that they have to overcome to be in a relationship in a healthy way. And I found these characters to be really real. They had flaws, they had issues, they had personality traits that kind of got on your nerves, and it made you not necessarily like them all of the time. Like, I love them, I love who they were, I love who they became, but there are points of it where I was like, you're kind of getting on my nerves, which I love, because I don't always want to like the character. I don't want to think somebody's perfect because I'm not perfect, and I want to be able to relate to the characters that I read in books. What I didn't like about the book was the sex scenes. I don't know what I could say about that without giving too much away. I do know what I can give away. Ari kind of sleeps around. She doesn't stay after hookups, and she's very much so into casual relationships. So she's very sex forward. And I felt like the sex scenes didn't reflect that. But with that said, it was still a great read. The romance, because they were flawed, was very believable, and it progressed at a rate that absolutely made sense. And the ending was absolutely perfect for who they were. So I gave it a 4 stars. I really enjoyed this book. I kind of can't wait to read what else this author does, and I'm so happy that this book is getting the hype that it deserves and that it is making people want to watch the movie, because the movie should be watched. I actually ended up rewatching the movie after I finished the book because I just felt so nostalgic kind of seeing the story play out again. So that's something the author really did well. She stuck to a lot of the strong points that When Harry Met Sally had, and was able to drive them through a new lens. So after I kind of took a break from horror, I returned. I had to. I heard so much about this book, and it just came out in October, and I wanted to get on the trend before everybody was reading it and talking about it. Like, I wanted to be there and like discuss it. So this book follows Margaret and her husband Hal and the life they tried to build in this house. When they first moved in, it seemed like their dream home and everything was perfect, but 6 months or so in, they both came to realize that it was a haunted house. Now, 4 years later from that, Margaret has learned to live with this haunted house. She knows how to deal with the ghosts. She knows what to expect in September. She's very aware of what her surroundings are like. And Hal is not. So he takes off, and the book kind of follows the mystery of his disappearance. I've never read any haunted house book, but I feel like this book is so different from them because it has a comical aspect to it. It's not the type of ghost you would expect to see in a haunted house. So it's not like dark or especially scary. It's more light and interesting. I know I should not have laughed at this book. This is not the type of book you're supposed to laugh at, but this book made me laugh out loud multiple times, and I loved it for that. I was still scared. It still had its scary moments, but it wasn't that scary. It was more an exploration of what a ghost is. Is there ghosts that are phantom souls haunting us, or are there ghosts of experiences and relationships that also haunt us? And it kind of explores all of that as we see the horrors of September, the September house. I love books that have older protagonists because I think they add something to the story with their life experiences. So the fact that Margaret was like in her 50s or 60s just made me like her so much more, because she wasn't somebody kind of inexperienced in dealing with hardships when it came to living in this house. She had gone through things in her life that shaped her ability to be able to function in this type of situation. If you're looking for a haunted house book to scare you, then I don't know if you would like this. But if you like the book In the Dream House, which is a deeper look at what a haunting can actually be, I think you would like this story as well. So rounding out the physical books I read is Black Queen. This is a YA story, much like You're Not Supposed to Die Tonight. So I went in with the expectation that I wasn't going to be as frightened. And I wasn't. So that's a good thing. I think it's because it's mostly a mystery. It's not horror. It's not like a slasher. It's more so what happens after somebody is dead. So they're trying to solve the mystery of how the homecoming queen Nova ended up dying. The thing I didn't like about this book is probably the thing that was absolutely necessary for this book. But my problem with this book is that it followed a white protagonist who is entitled and racist. This is the reason I haven't read Yellowface, because I don't want to see a book from that perspective. I just don't think it will do anything for me but piss me off, and that's exactly what this book did. It pissed me off. So that point of view is of Tinsley, whose family has a legacy of being the homecoming queen, so she had the expectation of her being the homecoming queen, and of course was really mad when that didn't happen. Of course, due to that, everybody thinks that Tinsley is the one who murdered Nova, including Duchess, the other point of view in the story, who is Nova's best friend. Duchess is determined to prove that Tinsley did it, so the only way she thinks she can do that is by getting close to her and trying to solve the mystery together. This book has themes that are really heavy. It talks about racism and police brutality and privilege, and I don't know if I wanted all of that in a mystery novel. Normally I do like books like that, but I think my expectation that I thought it was going to be more scary than introspective, and I spent most of the book thinking about these heavy topics instead of enjoying it. The other problem I had with it, as I said, I'm not good at guessing things. I guessed almost everything that happened in this book. Like, I knew exactly where it was going, and it seemed pretty obvious to me, so there was nothing like any red herrings that were kind of meant to throw you off the trail. You would think going into it that the obvious is not the answer, but I don't know, every aspect that was supposed to be surprising, I kind of got. Even things that weren't necessarily relevant to the plot. There was only one thing that surprised me, and I was very happy for that. I didn't necessarily dislike this book, I just didn't love it, and I don't think it was a book meant for me. I feel like this was more kind of like Dear White People. I feel like it was a book for white people, meant to teach them about the hardships and struggles of the African American community, and I don't think I need to know that because I live it. So I read this next book on my Kindle, and let me just say this, I did not think accidental cannibalism would be my jam, but I was absolutely living for that part of the story. The book is Butcher and Blackbird, which follows two serial killers, Rowan and Sloan, who end up crossing paths. Instead of deciding to kill each other, they decide to become friends and host a competition where every year they try and hunt down the same person to murder them and see who gets there first. I know, it sounds terrible, and I don't think I could say anything that's going to make it really better, but they're not that bad. They're not that bad, I promise. But they are funny, and they are kind of adorable, and I was living for the reverse grumpy sunshine trope that was taking place. I'm not a dark romance person. I've tried a few times, and I've never ended up liking it because it's always been more weird than anything to me. I'm usually not for non-consent, and I don't like stories that are mostly sex. Like, I need an actual plot, and I found that a lot of the time that doesn't actually end up happening. But this one had great plot, and it had great character development, and it was really funny to read, even though it had a lot of dark things happening. If Rowan were not a serial killer, he would be like one of my book boyfriends. He has an Irish accent. He is so golden retriever energy. And he has like a great relationship with his brothers, which is very endearing. But with all of that said, he is still a serial killer. And I promise, I do have somewhat of a moral code. So I know in like a real life situation, this is unacceptable. But you should read this book if you're looking for something that is kind of dark and Halloween-esque, but also really funny. I rated this book 4.5 stars, and it could have easily been a 5-star read for me. I just don't think it's a new favorite, and that's the only time I really rate something 5 stars. And last and somewhat least was Lakewood. I listened to this on audiobook, and I don't know if reading it would have made the experience any better because I just don't think I liked this book. So this book follows a woman who is desperately poor and in need of money to try and get her life back on the track. So she agrees to be a part of an experiment that takes place in a town called Lakewood. So I have been poor in my life. I have had like $10 in my account, my lights turned off, no heat, no hot water, a scraggly blanket, and a prayer. I have been there. I, however, have not been poor enough to go through this. What she continuously agrees to just reached a point of unbelievability. Like, when it gets to a certain point, no amount of money can convince somebody to stay. And she stays. And I just felt like I don't agree with this. I don't think any person would continue to do this. So you're not selling me on her staying. And I get what they were trying to do. They were trying to explore the type of experiments that have happened to brown and black folks for literally decades that have resulted in terrible treatment. I mean, all you have to do is read The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, or look up the testing that took place with birth control. If you didn't know, it was run by a doctor who believed in eugenics, and it took place with mostly brown and black folks so that the consequences wouldn't affect other races. So I get what the story was trying to do by bringing attention to this historical issue. I understand the context. I, however, did not like the book. It was really frustrating, and I was literally screaming, and I was listening to this while I was walking. I was listening to this at work, and I had to stop myself from screaming out loud. What the literal? So I would say, if you liked what this book was trying to do, if you like what it was drawing attention to, then actually look into the research and the things that have been done literally for hundreds of years. There's a lot of things that this book can draw attention to, but it has to do more than that. It has to be good, and I don't think it was very interesting or realistic. But then again, maybe I'm just not the type of person who can understand where this individual was coming from. So that was a 2-star read for me, and that's the book that kind of put me in a reading slump, because it was so not enjoyable that I didn't want to pick up anything else. But that's all the books I read in October. If you've read any of these books, comment down below your opinions of them and what you thought. If you have any books to recommend based off of the books that I read, definitely do that as well, because I'm looking for horror books to continue to read all throughout the rest of the year, not just for Halloween. Overall, this month was a really good month. Most of the books I read were either 4 or 5 stars. I'm looking forward to what I read next month. I'm kind of shifting away from horror and thriller and moving into Christmas, because I need to figure out what books I'm going to recommend this year. And I'm honestly so excited to just try and read more. But thank you so much for staying with me and listening to me talk, and I hope that I see you in the next video. Bye.